relationships, whether it's with an organization like this or whether it's with county, local governments, state governments, or members of Congress, but in some parts of Indian country. And this is very important to me, and very important, I think, to most Indian people. In Standing Rock, they don't have many friends. They don't have the relationships. It's a different country up there. They're very isolated, yet they still find the things important that you and I find important. Clean water, clean air, the ability to use their resources and use their natural rights to stake out a living, stake out a life where they have always lived and their ancestors have lived. So it was a really powerful experience, and it reminded me how fortunate that I am to be Cherokee, and how fortunate I am to be in a position of leadership in the Cherokee Nation at this time in our history. And I want to talk to you a little bit about that history today. Many of you know it, because I know there's many Cherokees in this room. There's just many folks in this room that are probably familiar with the history. But I think the Cherokee story is a story that is a great American story. If you think a great American story is a story of people who, against the odds, pulled themselves up, who overcame tremendous obstacles. If that's a great American story, then there's none better than the Cherokee story. A bit ironic, because some of those obstacles, let's say most of those obstacles, were imposed by the American government. But the fact of the matter is, Cherokees are Americans today, and we have a great story to tell, and it's a story that I think ought to inspire young people, particularly everywhere, whether you're Indian or not, whether you're a Cherokee citizen or not, just to think about the story. Now, where we came from, let's just go back a little bit to the 19th century before removal. As the United States is growing, as it's expanding in places like Georgia and Tennessee and the Carolinas, where Cherokees had called home for centuries and centuries. The pressure is mounting, and Cherokee Nation does something that not a lot of other Indian nations did, and that is we adapted to what was going on around us. We changed some parts of our way of life, preserved a great measure of the other parts of our way of life. We changed our government so that we could deal with the federal government on a government-to-government basis, as tribes should do, as the Constitution says. And we tried to survive, and we did a great job of surviving for a great long time before Indian removal. We built up a great and strong society in the southeastern part of the United States. We built schools. We took care of each other. We engaged in trade with our neighbors. In fact, we even educated our neighbors' kids, because a farmer named Sequoyah in the early part of the 19th century invented a written language for the Cherokee, and literacy spread across Cherokee country like wildfire. We became 90% literate within about half a generation. It was an unbelievable mark of progress for any people, and it happened to be the Cherokee people. But we did all of these things because we wanted to stand our ground, because there were powerful interests that wanted to run us over, wanted to take our natural resources, similar to what's going on with Standing Rock. But we stood our ground, not going to war, but to try to get along with our neighbors, to try to seek out cooperation. Now, one thing that happened, it happened in the hills of Georgia, and gold was discovered. Now, this isn't the only reason that we had pressures to get the heck out of the southeastern part of the United States, but one of the things that happened is they discovered gold in Georgia. Now, if you discover gold where you live, most people say, Eureka, that's great. If you're an Indian in the 19th century and you find gold and you're surrounded by white people, you say, oh, crap. Because you know what's happening next. You know what's happening next. And that's one of the things. That's one of the points of pressure that were brought to bear. It was so much pressure that according to the federal Indian policies at the time, the Cherokee people could not stay. And we were forcibly removed from the southeastern part of the United States in one of the darkest chapters really in the history of the world, certainly in the history of the United States. Now, I think you ought to understand American history, warts and all, the great parts and then the low parts, because you don't want to repeat them. And certainly one of the low parts in the history of this country is when the federal government rounded up 16,000 Cherokees. And understand it would be a tragedy if it was any group of people. But remember that this is a group of people that had created a strong society. that had created schools, educating their neighbors, trading with their neighbors. They had missionaries within their boundaries. They had created businesses. They had created farms. Cherokees were great farmers. There was not a lot of poverty in Cherokee country at this time. In fact, some reports was that there was no poverty in Cherokee country. But there was certainly a lot of prosperity, and there were certainly even some upper class Cherokees. But at the stroke of a pen and at the point of a bayonet, these folks were rounded up from their homes and put in stockades. John Ross, the chief of the Cherokee Nation at the time, was in Washington, D.C., trying to negotiate a way for the Cherokee people to stay. And keep in mind, the Cherokee Nation had won 2 Supreme Court cases in which the Supreme Court said the Cherokee Nation is a sovereign nation, and the laws of the state of Georgia shall not apply in Cherokee country. And Andrew Jackson said, let Justice Marshall, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, go enforce that decision. Let him enforce it, because Andrew Jackson was bent on removal of the Indian people. But as John Ross was in Washington, D.C. negotiating, he actually lost his home to a lottery in the state of Georgia. So when he comes home, there's other people living in his home. Can you imagine that? You go off to fight for your people, not fight a war, but to fight according to the laws of the country that you are surrounded by. And you come back and your property is gone. That's what the Cherokee people faced. And so they're rounded up in stockades. They're rounded up in stockades and they're forcibly removed to a place they had never been. And the even greater tragedy is the loss of life, because we lost a quarter of our population. 4,000 men and women and children and grandmas and grandpas and thinkers and doers and farmers and statesmen and, again, young people who knows what they might have been, died in stockades and died along the Trail of Tears. Now, the reason, though, that this Cherokee story is, to me, so spectacular and ought to be taught is because what happens next is extraordinary. Now, if you said that a people who were forcibly removed from their home, forced to walk or on horseback across the country, had all of their wealth stripped away, had their government. Keep in mind, we had a democratic government at this time, and it looked a lot like the United States government. We had a constitution, we had laws, we had a free press, and then that was all stripped away. And then there was great political strife within the Cherokees that were left, because there was great factions. One side thought the other side had betrayed the Cherokee people. You would anticipate that it would take generations for that people to ever come back, if they could ever come back at all. You would predict that they might fail. But what happens next is amazing, and it's a story that I think our children ought to hear, is that these people who were dispossessed, these people who had their natural resources taken, these people who had 4,000 of their brothers and sisters killed because of an Indian removal policy, within a generation, they built a great society not too far from where we are gathered today. In what now is northeast Oklahoma, the Cherokee people rose up and they built communities, and they built churches, and they built a system of public education, and they built a system of trade, and they built a vibrant society in a place that they were told would always be their home. And it was Cherokee country. And it's where I live today, in Veneta, Oklahoma. It's where I work today, in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. It's what's now the 14 counties of northeast Oklahoma. And I think it's an extraordinary reminder that a people that believe in taking care of themselves, a people who have the grit and determination to overcome the things that are put in the way, the people that believe that no matter how powerful the interest might be against them, that if they band together, they can succeed. And that's what happened in Cherokee country in what would become northeast Oklahoma. Now, that was a great chapter. It didn't last forever, because we know that the state of Oklahoma was founded in 1907. And at that time, the Cherokee government was wiped away. And in some ways, that was even more tragic in some ways than the Trail of Tears, certainly not tragic in terms of the loss of life. But our government was wiped away, our land base was wiped away, it was divided up. And so for most of the 20th century, there was no Cherokee Nation government to speak of. There was no land base. During my grandfather's lifetime, he was born in 1909, he was a full-blood Cherokee. He was as proud a Cherokee as you would ever know. But during most of his lifetime, he never had the opportunity to do what I did, run for the Council of the Cherokee Nation, to vote for a chief. We didn't have elected chiefs. Why? Because of federal Indian policy. But since about the 1970s, the Cherokee Nation has come back because the federal government had the good sense to understand that the centuries of atrocities towards Native Americans had to come to an end. That we are still here. You may have tried to extinguish the Cherokee people, the federal government, but it didn't work. And you can take away our government, and you can move us across the country, you can put us in stockades, but the Cherokee people are still here, and many of them are here in this room tonight. And so we came back, and where we've been in the last 30 years is we've been doing what we did before statehood, which we were building up Northeast Oklahoma again. If you are familiar with Northeast Oklahoma and some of the communities, you know that Cherokee Nation is involved. You know that we give mightily to public education. You know that we have scholarship programs to help our people go to schools. But back to the public education, when we give a check to a school, we don't say, and you can only spend this on the Cherokee kids. We say, go spend it on public education. Why? Because we've always believed in some sense of public education. We give to the rural fire departments. We give to the counties. We give to the towns to build roads. We engage in economic development with the state of Oklahoma. You know, South Coffeyville, a town that I used to represent on the council, and some folks in here are from South Coffeyville, or at least the area. South Coffeyville is an example of one of those places that the rest of the world might have forgotten about. And the rest of the world's not much interested in investing in. But Cherokee Nation did, and it's one example of how when we invest, we can revitalize a small town. We put a casino in there. We created 125 jobs. And within a few months, the dollar store opens down the road. Now, for the rest of the world, the dollar store is not a very big deal. But if you live in South Coffeyville, Oklahoma, and particularly if you're an elder, and there's no grocery store in South Coffeyville, well, it's one of the most important things in the world. And then across the highway, there starts to be some development. And then we work with the state of Oklahoma to bring in a manufacturing facility to create 250 jobs in a town that has less than 900 people in it. Now, that's right. And we're doing that in South Coffeyville. We're doing it in Grove, where we're building a casino, but we're also building up this wonderful infrastructure around it so that suddenly businesses that never considered building at the base of Selk Road Bridge are suddenly interested in building there. In Jay, Oklahoma, we built a new health center. And because of the water and the sewer and the electricity that we put in there, suddenly a manufacturing facility is interested in moving to small town Jay, Oklahoma. And that helps Cherokees, but it also helps the whole community. And so I am proud to be part of an organization, this great Indian nation, Cherokee Nation, that cares about rural Oklahoma, that cares about small towns, that is investing where others will not. And that's what interests me about the Grange. As I look at your history, and you're a very progressive organization. You're an organization that had the good sense to make sure women could be involved back when that just didn't happen. You had the good sense to make sure young people could be involved when that just didn't happen. And that's one of the reasons I think you've sustained as an organization throughout the great changes in rural America during the past, well, for you all it's 100 years, but I know the National Grange is coming close to 150 years, correct? And so you all have sustained yourselves, and we in Cherokee Nation have great respect for that. And we look at the issues that you care about. We look at issues like broadband. We look at issues like rural health care, where we are trying to build one of the greatest healthcare infrastructures in the United States right in rural Oklahoma, because we're building these clinics. We're building a hospital medical campus in Tahlequah, in which we're going to put 1,100 people to work in 3 years in healthcare professions. That's in Tahlequah, Oklahoma, folks. The population of Tahlequah is expected to increase by 12%, in part, in large measure, because of that healthcare investment. It's going to change much of northeast Oklahoma. We care about investing in a school consolidation bill that would have closed down a lot of small schools, and we just can't have it because our people go to those schools, and they've been going to those schools for generations. That is their home, and we know what happens when you close a school. So I look at the things that we stand for at Cherokee Nation. I look at the interests that we have, and I look at the interests of this fine organization, and I see so much that we have in common, and perhaps there's ways that we can work together. I hope that there are ways that we can work together. You all keep your finger on the pulse of what happens at the state capitol and in Congress. You all are looking out for rural communities, and when it comes to protecting rural America, when it comes to protecting rural Oklahoma, folks, we're all in it together. We have got to band together. We've got to find ways to work together. Now, I've always lived in rural America. I've always lived in Veneta, a little town in northeast Oklahoma. I always wanted to be there. And I think if we work together, I think if we keep doing the things that the Grange is doing, and I think if we keep doing the good work that Cherokee Nation is doing, we're having a $1.5 billion impact on a very rural part of the country. I think that the best days of rural Oklahoma, certainly rural northeast Oklahoma, are yet to come, and I am proud to be a part of it. I'm proud to stand with you. Thank you for all you do. Thank you for 100 years of great service to rural northeastern Oklahoma. Why don't